Wakened, one and all, to the inaugural episode of the Literary Baptists, which is a show that is unlike our universe, ever evolving, and hopefully we're going to have an enlightening and yet entertaining discussion through one of the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, the Silmarillion. Maybe it was partly inspired by the Amazon show, but I'd like to think that we had good reasons for confessional Baptists to want to discuss great works from a great author, and maybe even the intersection of that fiction with the truths of the faith. So I am Lee, and I'm here with Zach, Nick, and Maddie. Together, we are the Literary Baptists. So we're starting a chat through of the Silmarillion, and where better place to begin than the very first chapter, the Ainulindale. So now, who here has read the Silmarillion, and how recently? Obviously, before prepping this episode. Zach?
I read it a few years ago.
Yep.
Not Zach, though.
Oh, hello.
Okay, I'll go
Nick.
first.
Okay,
Secondly, yeah, I've read it. I've actually read the whole thing twice. It's been quite a few years since I read it last. Probably 10.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been quite a while.
Well, I'm currently finishing it. I have one chapter to go to completely finish it, and it's my second attempt. And I tried it about 15 years ago and gave up because it was the first of the Tolkien books I ever even attempted to read, to my doom. And
Brave
I was,
choice.
rapidly overwhelmed. And only recently, in fact, it put kind of a bad taste in my mouth for the series until recently when I went ahead and decided to attempt it again, and I regret my life because I waited way too long.
It really makes you think of the significance of the passage of time.
It really does. It really
Profound.
does. Nicholas, what's your story with the Silmarillion?
I read Hobbit and Lord of the Rings a few years ago, and then I said, well, I may as well finish and read the Silmarillion. So I forced myself to do it. I said I'm going to force myself to do it, and then I did it, and I enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
Surprisingly, everybody says it's so hard to get through, and
Nope.
it's not. It's there are parts that are better than others, but it's great.
Yeah.
It's worth reading, but do it third.
Right. Do it third. Yeah, I've talked to people before about like what should be the progression of going through Tolkien's works, and definitely you've got to start with The Hobbit, then you've got to progress up to the Lord of the Rings. Sometimes I think parts of Lord of the Rings are more difficult than even parts of the Silmarillion. I think part of the thing for the Silmarillion is the chapters on a whole are usually pretty short. So I could sit down and read, well, like preparing for this episode, I was able to read the Ainulindale in one sitting. I don't know, even with some of the shorter chapters of Lord of the Rings, I don't think I would have been able to do that. It's just sometimes those chapters really do stretch on in a good way, but just, more pages per chapter, the reading experience kind of stretches out. But that was my journey too. I had read The Hobbit right around the time the Jackson films came out, and then read The Lord of the Rings after seeing all the Jackson films, which I was kind of glad that happened because I think if I had gotten really wrapped up in the books before I saw the movies, I would probably hate the movies almost as much as I hate Rings of Power right now. I'm going to let my hater flag fly right now.
Oh, man.
But, and then the Silmarillion, I actually, fun fact, I had read it I had listened to the audiobook once, probably back in like 2015, 2016. And then in 2020, I was like, I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it on paper. And I enjoyed it so much, I actually read it twice in that year. And it just kind of took over. It took over my Tolkien brain, and it has a way of like kind of adding like a special layer of history to Middle Earth that really gets played out in Lord of the Rings, but Lord of the Rings now feels that much more epic for having kind of taken in the Silmarillion as a whole. And I think this chapter plays a big part in that too, at least for me. Of course, Genesis is one of my favorite books of the Bible anyway, and there's so much like of a Genesis feel to this, obviously in a different way, sub-created in a different way. Who has just some sort of some general reflections about the chapter? What were your maybe for those of us who have read it recently, either after a long time or not previously? What were some of the kind of standout maybe passages, if you had a favorite passage that you wanted to that really stuck out to you?
Do we need to go in order?
No.
If so, I'll jump.
Jump.
Might
as well jump.
So one of the things that I found interesting, and I don't remember reading this the first time that I read it, but the idea of Melkor going out and wanting to be in the void and trying to search for the flame. I thought it was very interesting that he pursues solitude, and the source of some of that, maybe not the source, but it's an expression of some of that evil, that pride, and that kind of lust for power is manifested in solitude. And whereas the some of the other of the Ainur, are we going to make fun of pronunciation? But
yes, but silently.
But they tend towards working together and going against the solitary man as a team, basically. That was something I just didn't notice the first time I read through, and but I think it's actually a big theme in the chapter, or whatever we're going to call it.
Yeah, it's a chapter, but it's also kind of like a whole section of the Silmarillion on its own too. So it's like weird. No, I definitely I get what you mean about the issue of secrecy, because I think I've heard some folks and thought about it independently too, that there is a theme of issues regarding works done in secrecy, with several different characters throughout the Legendarium, and actually a lot of them are related both to Melkor / Morgoth, as well as Aule too, who kind of we'll see in future chapters here that he did his own secret works that caused no small ripple in among the Ainur. So yeah, I think there's definitely something there about issues of works done in darkness versus out in the open. Yeah. Anyone else? Any other big things that jumped out to you on your read?
Well, I really enjoyed the whole reference to the singing and the music just being the way that Iluvatar is, communicating with them. At first it says he speaks to them and expounds to them a musical theme by speaking to them, which was interesting to me. He doesn't sing it to them, but he speaks and they hear music, and they begin to sing, which is, it's just really cool to me. That music is kind of my background, but all the melodies and the counter melodies and all the harmonies that they talk about in the creation, and you can see that it's like a if you listen to a classic work of music, you can you hear all the different pieces and how they fit together, and to use that as the way that a world is created is just really brilliant to me, because you have all these intricacies, and you have the master, the composer, who fits them all together. He already has this music in his mind, and basically he writes it down and someone else performs it, and he gets to sit back and direct, which is pretty cool. But um, I, that's not the way that God did it, but
Right.
um, but it's a really cool creation story, and it's
Right. It's not the way that God did it, but I think one of the interesting things about Tolkien's philosophy, the whole issue, or not issue, the idea of subcreation that he puts forward, that this creation account contains the elements of the creation of the real world, but sort of remixes it in some sort of a way to fit the story that Tolkien's trying to tell. But he can't escape the fact that the world was spoken into existence, but he turns it into song.
right.
And I think that's very I think it's very affecting, because we know the power of music. Um, we've
Right.
all been affected by music in some way, and it seems almost innate to think that the beauty of music would be at the core of the world. I think that's a beautiful idea.
Yeah. I also I wonder if there's a relation between the different ages of the earth and the different movements we see in the creation music. Um,
There are three strains.
right. So I wonder if there's some of that. And at the end of the third, it stops, right?
Mhm.
And so you don't really we don't know what happens.
Right, because kind of a fourth age begins at the end of Lord of the Rings, and then there's no more story to tell after the end of the
Right,
third age, right?
right.
It does fit kind of
I
nice.
I don't know how much of that was intentional with Tolkien. It probably was, but I may be reaching for something that he wasn't intending. But I just thought maybe there could be a relation there to the number of time. Like, you see Melkor start to meddle a little bit within the first movement, and then in the second movement you have the coming of the children. Um, and then by the end of the third movement, in the second movement, it says that Melkor gains the upper hand, and you would see that, I think, played out in the history of Middle Earth, um, with Melkor gaining an upper hand. In the first one, he just causes problems, and you see that at the end of the chapter. Everything they create, he's he's meddling with and causing problems. And then by the end of the third one, it's like, okay, I'm gonna stop this now. So maybe I'm reaching. I don't know, but I thought it was interesting, at least.
Well, yeah, because at some point the world has to be created. Like the creation has to end at some point, right?
Yeah,
In order
yeah,
for the life to go on,
right.
in order for the children to wake up. So
Hmm.
it does have to end at some point. And I know this is something we'll talk about in a bit, but um, Eru Iluvatar is the one to stop the music, right? It's not like the
Hmm.
Ainur quit singing. It was
Right,
he said, you know, Aya, let these things be. Like the
right.
singing had to end in order for the things to be. Yeah. Maddie, any big thoughts? Any big powerful thoughts?
Nothing really aside from what I think we're going to talk about anyways, but on what Zach was saying, I thought it was significant. I guess we'll talk about it here in a little bit, just the significance of singing. Um, just how, like, when you try to study, say, like memorize scripture, it's much harder than memorizing a song. Like I can't tell you how many times I can memorize a song from like middle school and then try to like actually memorize verse. It's just interesting how we can retain song so much easier than just words on a page or spoken word. So I thought that stood out to me, especially because I'm not like a musical person. I love music, but I can't play an instrument and I can't sing. And I don't know how to read music or anything like that. So to be honest, like reading Tolkien's work with all his music, I'm learning to appreciate the music throughout his work and the song, because at first it was kind of, in a sense, a nuisance for me, because like I don't know what tune this goes to. I don't know how to read this in my head to a song. It seemed kind of like an interruption that I didn't really particularly care for at first. But as I listen to like audiobooks and stuff, and the more I study about history and medieval, stuff like that, where they really use song quite a bit to tell story and entertain. And I just think it stands out as something that's unique to Tolkien's work, obviously.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people say, especially when they're reading Lord of the Rings. They're like, "Yeah, just skip the poems, just read the story." I'm like, "No, don't skip the poems, because they tell so much, and they do kind of lock in with this greater theme of music being so central to the world." Um,
And what's so
um,
interesting is that like we're doing an audiobook of The Fellowship of the Ring with my family. So we just listened to the House of Tom Bombadil, and he's saying so
yes,
much through that. And it was so cool to hear that again after reading the Silmarillion. Like so much of what I've read actually comes out in his song, which before when I read it and I hadn't read the Silmarillion, like it just totally went over my head. I didn't cue into any of it. So yeah.
it really does deepen the whole experience of Lord of the Rings. Oh, and man, so okay, so here's a crazy fan theory that people, since you brought up Tom Bombadil, uh, a lot of people think that he in the books is the embodiment of the music of the Ainur,
Hmm.
the theme of Iluvatar.
Hmm.
And that, so like he's not just some like elemental spirit, that he's very much like the symbolizing the presence of Eru in his creation, and is completely like untouchable with evil, which is why he can hold the ring and kind of toss it around and hand it back and have no effect whatsoever, because he's not of Arda, he's something else.
Yeah, that would make sense why he was there before men.
Imagining the creation, with this beautiful music, and then you hear Tom Bombadillo. It's kind of him coming through. Ring Dillo.
Are there eternal relations of origin between himself, his blue hat, and his boots that are yellow? That's what we really need to ask.
Yeah.
I love the Tom Bombadil chapters of Fellowship of the Ring. They are some of my favorite parts of that book.
100% agree.
Yes,
The
absolutely.
whimsy. Oh, it's so good. I'm a big Bombadil stan.
For real. No cap.
That's right. On Eru. So we danced around it a little bit, but I'm curious what you think. What reflections of the Book of Genesis do you guys see in the Ainulindale? Was there anything that particularly stood out to you that was like, man, that feels very real? I have some ideas. While I find my passage, if anybody else has any thoughts.
I don't know. It's just carving out a place for the children to dwell was pretty Garden of Eden there. other than that, I don't know that I would have drawn in a whole lot of specific parallels to Genesis in particular, or the creation story there, other than God speaking and like let it be, let there kind of like a let there be light. He speaks and it is. You have that, but I think the rest of it is more like we see what happens with Lucifer. We think of that and we go, okay, that's obviously like Melkor is Lucifer in the way that he lusts after power, and wants to be God, and he brings that to earth with him.
And the mention of the void, in the beginning, the earth was without form and void. So
Water.
you have that. Water.
Yeah.
Lots of water.
There were deeps there. Yeah. That was a big one. That was something I was going to tune into if you guys didn't mention it. That whole very much like unfinished aspect of the world, as the music was being played out, as the spirit hovered over the surface of the waters, almost. That was what came to mind to me regarding that. I found the passage, one of the things that really stood out to me in thinking about the creation story in Genesis. So Iluvatar's kind of rebuking Melkor here, but it's a quote. It says, "So mighty are the Ainur, and mightiest among them is Melkor, but that he may know that all the Ainur that I am Iluvatar." So very much like Tetragrammaton, I am that I am. I am Iluvatar. Those things that ye have sung, I will show them forth, that ye may see what ye have done. And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme can be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined. And so just in that one quote, I see reflections of the sovereignty of Yahweh over his creation, and the fact that even those who attempt evil and attempt to subvert his plan only further go on to actually serve it out, and by opposing it be crushed, and then the glory of his righteousness stamp out that evil, and be shown to be that much brighter for having overcome the darkness.
Yeah, you just become a part of the composition, and it's all like, if you heard that part by itself, you might go ooh, but in the the greater sound, it's wow, look what God has done. So it's
well, and even the significance of him singing the song and then doing the song before the foundation of the world, as it were. It's like it's all laid out before it even happens. So you get that heavy emphasis on, spoiler alert, predestination.
We got Calvinists up in this room.
Absolutely. I think Lewis did something similar though in the Chronicles of Narnia with
Magician's Nephew.
Yeah, there was
Aslan sung Narnia into existence.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because between, like, you have Aslan singing Narnia into existence, and then my kids and I just finished Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and they go to the end of the earth. And so I'm seeing like echoes of that obviously later on in this book of the ends of the earth. And I just thought that was interesting, the parallels between their ideas.
Now, I've heard some people criticize this chapter to say that Middle Earth is a polytheistic place, that there are multiple gods, and so I'm curious your thoughts on the presence of the Ainur as almost a means of creation, or are they themselves also creators?
Not everybody at once.
They, I don't think that it's still very clear that Eru is the source of everything. He's the one who he created them. Then he taught them the music and taught them how to do the music. Like there's no way that you could point to anything except Melkor's his pride and him wanting to do his own thing. Everything else is just clearly direct line. But then, the passage you read, Lee, I mean, even that, like he knew it, and it's not going to upset anything. So I don't think it's really fair to make it to say that it's polytheistic, especially since there is that direct line. You can say, where did the Ainur come from? Where did the music come from? And every time it goes back, where did the flame, the imperishable flame come from?
Yeah.
All of this stuff has its source.
Why they're not called the children of the Ainur when elves and men wake up? They're the children of Iluvatar.
Right. It all has its source.
Well, and the Ainur are called the offspring of his thought. So they even come from his thought. And I think, like, I had the gut reaction to think, oh, this is like pagan, polytheistic, because it does echo so much of like that Greek kind of pantheon thing happening. But at the same time, I mean, I'm not a Tolkien scholar. I don't know everything that he's ever written or anything like that. But part of me thinks that this is his attempt of like a monotheistic response to pagan myth, and how he's showing that while people might have come up with these different multiple gods, that really they're all echoes of what God has done in his creation. And it's kind of his way of writing that into his own story, because they, as we see later, they all kind of have their own elements or, realms, as it were, of where they're involved. So it does seem polytheistic in that sense, but at the same time, they're all from his thought, and they all come from him, like you said.
Right.
That's a good
Everything that they create too, if you go back and read it, they were already shown a vision of that. So they sing it, and then Eru shows them the vision of their song, and then they go create what they saw in their vision. So it's not like they're coming up with it on their own.
A lot of this reminds me of the writing of like the Bible. Yes, we can point to Paul wrote this part or David wrote this part, Moses, but I mean, we all still say that this is the word of God. And so, we don't think that the human authorship of the Bible in any way diminishes the divine authorship of the Bible. And I think that's the same way in this, with the creation, except it's not human.
Yeah, I really agree with you there. That was kind of a thought that I was having as well. That like in the same way that the Spirit indwelt the biblical authors, so that we can say that their words are the words of God as well. I think that very same principle is being created into this creation tale, where Eru is very much inspiring these works of these holy ones. So it says that well, just the first. I love the first the first sentence of this. I'm problematic. I know. The first sentence where it says, "Yes, my steak is prepared." It's pretty clear. Like there was Eru, the one who in Arda is called Iluvatar. Thanks, elves, for making an extra name. And he made first the Ainur, the holy ones that were the offspring of his thought, and they were with him before aught else was made. And you could almost hear in there, and all things were made through him and for him, right? I think a very similar creative principle of the Logos, but just the Ainur in this world.
I've got a controversial thing that I'll add. It actually a lot of this reminds me of the Michael Heiser kind of theology
Mhm.
with those I forget what he calls it, like the divine council or
Divine counsel, yeah.
something. It reminds me a lot of that, where you have these almost like the pagan gods, these great like super angels that are involved in doing a lot of God's work, delegated, not doing it on their own or anything, but delegating.
Mhm.
God delegates work to them. This reminds me a lot of that, and I wonder if they have some kind of a common source. I don't think. I don't think that. I don't think that that Heiser's getting his stuff from the Silmarillion, but
I hope not. I wonder though if there is like a Roman Catholic crossover there or something. I don't know much about their theology of too much about angelology, for instance, for them.
Well, I know they have a heavy emphasis on like the Archangel Michael and Gabriel and things like that. But I haven't read, any of the Apocrypha, so I have no idea.
And I know that Heiser gets a lot from the Book of Enoch, which is just some, non-canonical book. I think isn't it kind of Gnostic? I haven't read it, so I don't know.
It's kind of in the messy middle.
Yeah.
It gets quoted though in the part
That's true.
in Jude about Michael fighting over the
Right.
bones of Moses.
You're right.
And you do see a lot of imagery in the Bible of angels doing the work of God, whether it's just purely symbolic or not. You do see that.
Like God's administrative staff.
So they are his messengers.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've got mail.
So I am itching to talk about the baddest bad boy, Melkor. It's so weird. I think he's just a very like fascinating entity. Not in like an anti-hero sense, but like they're like, again, I'm gonna go kind of Calvinist on it, but I mean there's a little bit of Melkor in all of us, the kind of depravity that he has on display, I think really is he's easy to identify with because I'm kind of him more than I want to admit.
Yeah.
Stop being such a dark lord.
Am I thinking too highly of myself? I'm that bad of a sinner,
You're
you
not
guys.
that
You might as well call me
powerful.
the Dark Lord.
Well, and I think even like backtrack a little bit, just the, like having the creation narrative at all, the importance of that foundation of like a worldview philosophy for Tolkien's work, I think is what makes it so real. So when you have someone like Melkor come in, obviously he's very like modeled after Satan. But it just makes that much more sense, and why I think a lot of his work is so consistent with our reality, even though it's fantastical in many ways.
Mm-hmm. He does give us a pretty clear answer to the problem of evil in Arda just within this one chapter, right? Because basically everything evil that comes after this is directly relatable to Melkor / Morgoth and his followers then thereafter. And clearly stating that even those who try to oppose his theme are only serving his theme. So that's a pretty tidy in-world answer to the problem of evil that I think largely checks out.
Now here's a question I don't think anyone is asking. Do you think he's like Pelagian? Because it's like that influence of Melkor, like influencing men to bad. Because like you talked about total depravity, the men aren't really totally depraved. They're just influenced by Melkor. I don't know. That Roman Catholic.
Soteriology, yeah.
Yeah.
I could see that. Because they're in the First Age, there really are kind of neutral people, almost a little bit Adamic.
Mm-hmm.
I bet if you actually talk to him, he'd be like, "Oh, it's not an allegory," and he would try to get out of it that way. He'd be like, "I'm no heretic. It's not an allegory." Because it clearly, I think it is. I mean, Maddie, like you said, I think it is Pelagian. There is kind of this just blank slate of neutrality with the children. And I just am counting. I mean, I know the elves don't have any kind of analog so much to humanity, so I just count them as people. Maybe I shouldn't, but I actually the people in early Genesis that live like hundreds of years, they're kind of like them, if anything.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah,
it's not one for one, but
no.
It has that kind of gist to it. They're living longer, they're healthier. In a sense, they're kind of like Adam. They don't just die. We
Right.
die.
Yeah, I think the argument of whether it's sort of a Pelagian concept or not is kind of made problematic by the fact that there is no Adam. There's no one first man, but then there are people. It's almost like Adam as one person is kind of stretched out over entire generations of mankind. So there are the first men who wake up, and their first interaction is with Finrod Felagund, which, spoiler alert, the guy who teaches men to sing. Again, thanks to the elves for making that happen. But and then there are those who end up who are afraid of the elves and afraid of Arome and fall into the clutches of evil forces. And from that point on, after that, there is a line of evil men, and then there's a line of righteous men who are allied with the Eldar on the side of the Valar, and the evil men are allied with Sauron or whoever, or the orcs, or take your pick. Ultimately serving Melkor too, but it's with the lack of one human man, an Adam figure to come into place. It's almost like that total actual freedom of will gets stretched out over multiple generations of men.
Yeah, it seems like there's a complete lack of, well, probably intentionally on his part, but they don't actually tell you how they get there. They're just there.
Mm-hmm. They're just
like,
wake up.
Yeah, they're just there. But
Chrissy,
then also,
wake up.
You reminded me a little bit of, there is a sense of total depravity when it comes to the orcs. Like, you have, at least here, I know that it might vary his lore on how orcs came about, but this idea that they're kind of like corrupted elves. It's
right.
It's kind of, yeah, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Sorry.
I was actually really excited you brought that up, because that's another huge principle in Tolkien's work, is the fact that evil is not creative. Evil has to corrupt things that have been made good. Like, you see that with the Black Speech, the fact that it uses Sindarin characters but twists them into a different language. Orcs, even in the different versions of the origin of orcs for Tolkien, they're always twisted elves in some way or another. Morgoth, he just tries to hijack the theme, and he comes in with sort of his dissonant part of it, something that doesn't fit, but it's still music. Like, he can't just go and make his own song. he's just hijacking his one melody line, basically. And when he goes to Earth, he's knocking down the things that the Ainur are bringing. So
Yeah,
I think
and here, like Melkor, he wants to create. Like he's staring at the void. He wants to make something, but he can't. All he can do is corrupt. And even with the song, he's still using song.
One of the interesting things that I was thinking about is with singing, when you have all of the Ainur just singing together, they start off kind of solo, and then they work towards like a more polyphonic sound. They work together, and they're working together. But then Melkor is out just chilling in the void, looking for fire, the flame or whatever, and he's bringing that. He's going against the polyphonic sound. Like he's bringing something else in, and his emphasis is on the dark and what he can create. It reminds me a lot of like that kind of dark, like romantic artist. The ones that they're just trying to create their own thing. They want to be remembered for this one thing, and they ignore the whole world. It's kind of a trope in like TV shows and movies and stuff. And I mean, it's kind of different, but it's like the dark Spider-Man in Spider-Man 3. Like basically that's Melkor. So
Bully Maguire.
Yeah. So there, I think it again brings back that whole idea of like him, that solitude is an issue. That's a problem. Because the whole point is that they're working together to accomplish God's work. Whereas
And solitude,
the solo thing.
Solitude from Eru, specifically.
Yeah.
I have the passage here that is speaking to what you're saying. I'm just going to read part of it. So it came into the heart of Melkor to interweave matters of his own imagining that were not in accord with the theme of Iluvatar, for he sought therein to increase the power and glory of the part assigned to himself. So he's a self-seeker of power. To Melkor, among the Ainur, had been given the greatest gifts of power and knowledge, and he had a share in all the gifts of his brethren. He had gone often alone into the void places, seeking the imperishable flame, capital I, capital F. For desire grew hot within him to bring into being things of his own, and it seemed to him that Iluvatar took no thought for the void, and he was impatient of the emptiness. Yet he found not the fire, for it was with Iluvatar. But being alone, he had begun to conceive thoughts of his own, unlike those of his brethren. So in his isolation, he was twisting himself to be that much more unalike with the other Ainur.
And to use the scripture analogy, you have Paul or Peter, for example, mentions Paul's writing. Paul is quoting the Old Testament all the time. They're working together, like the 66 books and however many authors of scripture, they're all working together. But then you have people like Joseph Smith or Muhammad. Muhammad or Joseph Smith, they're like talking to an angel in a cave by themselves or reading from some things with special glasses that only they have. It is kind of, it kind of works there too. The leaders of other religions or heretical groups, they're mimicking this idea of Melkor and going off and trying to create their own thing.
You just dropped the mic.
Yeah. Well,
No, that's a really good point. Right? In that isolation thing is a big deal with Melkor. That'll be something that he passes on to Sauron as well. And Sauron will come up with crafty things alone. Like that's where the One Ring comes from. He was working with Celebrimbor to make rings of power, but then secretly in his own forge, he was making a ring to control the other rings, a master ring. And then the Vala Aule will also do his own secret work, and that's where the dwarves will come from. But that one, I don't want to spoil it, but he actually comes out and confesses that he's done it, and it becomes blessed. But so there's a key difference between those two approaches to isolated work. So Melkor is burrowing further and further into himself and in his own pride, whereas Aule truly in an act of he's just so excited for the children, and the children haven't come yet, and so what little part of the thought of the children of Iluvatar, what that was public to them, and turned that into what he thought they would be, the dwarves. But then he came out and confessed that he had done that. But anyway, we'll get there in good time. But that isolation thing, yeah, I think that's really important. What else about our bad boy Melkor?
He was very bad.
He's so bad, the baddest. One thing I thought was interesting, especially with our familiarity with the Jackson movies, we always associate Sauron with fire, and like it's just the fire thing. Melkor has just as much mastery over fire as he does ice. You could almost consider him like an ice lord. He'll eventually live in a frozen place in Arda, and it mentioned that he used cold and heat, and now I'm trying to find that. And I'm not going to be able to find it, but yeah, so he's that much greater of a dark lord that he's got. He has mastery over several elements, not just one.
Like cold fire.
Cold fire, yeah.
I think it's interesting because go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
The Bible has the Prince of the Power of the Air, and I think it's interesting that he chose air as kind of the big foil for Melkor. That Manwë, I don't know how to pronounce it. Sure. So going with Manwë is associated with air, and yet like Prince of the Power of the Air, like it's kind of one of those things where it's not congruous at all. I do kind of think of ice and fire, heat, cold. I think of those extreme things as being more destructive than air. But, there are tornadoes and hurricanes and things like that. But I do think it's interesting that he associated those with him rather than air, which is one that would make, I think, a little bit more sense, possibly.
Yeah, especially because like Melkor's trying to take mastery of Arda, and you would think the way that he would do that is to hit the skies, to be patrolling from the air. If you're going to have mastery over something, you're literally over it. You're looking down into it, and it would be a good mockery of Eru to say, well, Eru might be out there, but I'm here above. In and above Arda. But yeah, I think that's an interesting decision for what elements that Melkor would be.
Well, and I think like when Iluvatar is talking to him being Ulmo, about Melkor having fire and cold, it's like how his influence can be over the water, and how fire in a sense can dry up or evaporate water, and then cold can also freeze it. And so he warns Ulmo about that, because that obviously affects water. So I thought that was interesting reading it through this time. I didn't notice it last time.
This is when it's helpful to have the Pokemon type advantage grid memorized. Manwë is a flying type.
Come up with one of those.
Yeah, he's like Pidgey.
Yavanna is a grass type. So.
Is Melkor a fire type?
Melkor is a fire and ice type.
And ice, yeah.
Somehow.
It's
quite a type combo. You can see why he's the most powerful of the Ainur. Those are very powerful types. Speaking of Ulmo, I think he's my favorite of the Valar. I think he's super cool. He's super based. He interestingly, so I know we didn't get into it here, but all of the Valar are married except for Ulmo. He's the bachelor Vala. I don't know what significance that is, but I guess I assume there had to be a bachelor. But he's the one who works so tirelessly for the benefit of Middle Earth in the course of the Silmarillion. And he takes some really key actions for the defense of the children of Iluvatar, as well as really, for the created world itself. Anybody have any thoughts? Because I know we get to hear from Ulmo in this chapter, which is why I bring him up. But he occupies the waters, which apparently is where the music of Iluvatar can be sensed the most. And I'm very intrigued with that idea. Why, of all of the elements in Middle Earth, would that be the case? Why water? I don't know.
It's in and around everything. It's in the
Yeah,
deep,
like it's the most
places. It's in the air. It's in the snow. It's in the sea. It's in the rivers, and it runs through the whole earth.
Like those silly signs that people have in their yards that say "water is life." They have all these like trite sayings and
Salt
stuff,
life, man.
and it says "water is life." Like, I mean, that's kind of
until you
true in a
drown,
way.
then it's not. But
Well, yeah, but it is necessary for life, pretty much all of it. But also, you can see in water, you can see beauty, you can see like majesty, you can see sublime, you can see all of that in water. Like you think about a waterfall, or like when I was a kid growing up in South Florida, one of the things I loved doing, or not a kid, I guess I was a teenager, was going to the beach at night, especially when it was a new moon, and just looking out at the ocean. You hear the waves, and it's just black out there. I guess I was kind of being like a Melkor, looking out into the void. But
seeking the imperishable flame.
but
The void.
but you feel the power of this just expanse of just water. And one of the things that is interesting is that water and mastery over water for humans is always associated with freedom. So you have like Athens and America now, and then most famously is Britain. And you have like rural
and
Britannia,
Numenor, don't forget.
and Numenor. And so those are
all very real places.
yeah, all four. But it's always associated with a strong, like, free society. I think water's a good choice for this. It's not always destructive. Like fire usually seems. I mean, fire is helpful and everything, but it's also very destructive. The earth is cool; it sits there, and when it doesn't, that's bad. But water, like those kind of leftist signs, water is life.
Yeah, kind of the more I thought about it, the more I thought that water was almost a good stand-in for natural revelation of Eru, because in kind of piggybacking off what you said, Zach, water is everywhere. It's and it's not always destructive either, but like water is so necessary to carry on life. That would stand as a testament to the existence of God and to his willingness to support the creation even after it's been placed under the curse of the fall too. That ongoing general love for his creation goes on in Arda. It's pictured best in the water.
I think so too, that you can hear water, like unless it's completely still, but you hear waves, streams, like trickling streams are very soothing. They kind of have a song in and of themselves. Waterfalls, rain, like you can hear it. In a sense, it is like a song, and but also can be kind of intimidating and scary if it's a wave, a storm. or a really heavy downfall. So it kind of has that powerful, I don't know, I'm always humbled by water, like being near the ocean, how expansive it is, and how while you can maybe say you have control of water, you really can't. I mean, an earthquake comes, a rainstorm comes, people are flooded out, tidal waves, tsunamis. It's just really hard to, we can try, but we can't stop water.
In the kind of the same way that mountains do as well. Like in my own life, I've spent very few moments around mountains, and when I have, it's been kind of distracting, just staring and realizing how tiny I truly am. And I think it's no accident here that the most morally upright and the most powerful of the morally upright Valar are associated with water and with the air / mountains, because Manwë also has that association. He lives on the highest mountain in creation, Taniquetil, and it's so tall it rises above the clouds, which then of course correlates to his air guardian aspect. So I don't think, again, I don't think it's an accident that these two things that make us feel very tiny and remember our place in the created order are places that are championed by the most upright of Valar, and really kind of the two most powerful opponents of Melkor in the course of history too. Sorry, Zach, what were you going to say?
No, it's okay. It's Smeagol found the ring in water, so I'm just saying. The Iluvatar had a plan.
He did. He had a plan.
He meant for him to find it.
Yep.
He meant to kill Isildur in the river so that he would drop
right.
it in the water and it would make its way to Smeagol. Right.
That's right.
Eru's hand is in all things.
Yep.
He ordains the ends and the means.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, it's so good. It's so reformed.
Absolutely.
I think people can't help it though. Like truly, if you've read scripture, you might be inconsistent in your doctrines and theology. Like everybody, God is in control, all that kind of stuff. They just, it. So we don't ever think that hard about it, I think is more the issue than anything.
Yeah. If only we did. If only everyone did, it would be fun. Well, any other big thoughts or takeaways from the chapter?
I have one more thing that I thought was interesting. I'll just mention it briefly, but I thought it was interesting that some of the Ainur just stayed with God or stayed with Eru. They no interest in getting involved. They just want to stay doing what they had been doing, and I don't think we get any more information about them. Just they're there though,
just doing their thing.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, and I was thinking a lot about the motives, and I was like, I can't think. I mean, maybe it's good. Melkor didn't do that, so maybe that's the thing that should be praised. But I don't know, because the other ones get praised a lot too.
Maybe they were able to see all the hardships that were ahead for coming to Arda, and just said, you know what, not for me. I'm gonna stay here and stay in the heavenly chorus, or whatever you want to call whatever it is they're a part of with Eru. But because it's without a doubt the Valar went through intense work and suffering when they came to Arda.
So I think of them as wanting to stay and worship, and you think of them as cowards who want to avoid avoid all the trouble.
I find it difficult that they could take part in singing that whole world into existence and not be just overcome with excitement for the children of Iluvatar to come, because that's basically the reason that the Valar do come to Arda, is we want to see the waking of the children of Iluvatar. They're all so stoked for them to come along. Arome goes running around Arda basically looking for them. I would find it hard to not be excited and want to go join in, but obviously
Yeah,
there were costs too.
I couldn't help but think of like First Peter, I think it's chapter 1, where he talks about the angels longing to look.
Mhm.
I kept thinking of that reading this. I don't know if that was in his
Hmm.
mind at all, but
Yeah.
I think of the Ainur a lot like angels.
Mhm.
We've kind of talked about that already, but just that longing to look and that they know in a sense what's happening, but there's just some things that
Mhm.
they can't wait to find out and see how it's going to play out. And that just harkened me back to that section of scripture. I loved it.
And it's also pretty cool to remember as knowing further on what's going on in the book, but men who die, they're given like death for them is the gift of Iluvatar to men, something that elves don't experience, and they get to go to the very same place that the Ainur that didn't come to
Mm.
Arda get to be. So
Mm.
basically the throne room of Eru is filled with Ainur that didn't come to Arda, and men that only knew Arda until they died received the gift, and now exists solely in the presence of Eru for eternity, something that even elves never get to do. So, in a certain sense, even the older children of Iluvatar don't fully understand what Eru is doing. Only
Yeah.
men get that. Only men get that gift.
Hmm.
But I know that's a big spoiler, a big topic for another time. But
Spoiler alert.
God created mankind special. Who'd have thought?
That is something that I also noticed. They're definitely Imago Dei. You have the Ainur involved in everything else, forming the earth, all this kind of stuff. But you have the children of Iluvatar uniquely and specifically set apart from all of creation. And I thought that was also
For him,
fascinating.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is really fascinating.
Another
It's almost
thing,
like the elves are created for Arda and men are created for Eru. Like
Mm.
they spend what little time they have to spend when they wake up in Arda, but their real home is at Eru's
Mm.
throne. Sorry, Zach, I cut in on you there.
that's okay. It talks about um, how the Valar are their lives are tied to the life of Arda,
Mhm.
um, and included in that is Melkor. So it's interesting that even that he's still an integral part of it. It's like, what were you thinking? But it's part of the you know Eru knows his mind, right? He knows what he's thinking, and he still lets him go, and ties his fate to that of Arda. So I thought that was pretty interesting too. But I'm not sure of all the significance of that, but
I was gonna say
Yeah,
that
well,
sounds a little supralapsarian.
Melkor definitely does put his mark on Arda, though. Like there
Mhm.
are areas of the land that there are scars there from this initial war until the end of time. Um, there's a part of the land that is basically infused with Melkor's screams of pain later on that we learn about in the Silmarillion too. So he certainly makes his mark on the earth,
Yeah.
and I think it's really interesting that in the course of this chapter, we're not really told like how much time goes by. Like, we get the 6 day creation countdown in Genesis, but we don't know how long the span of time goes. But we know that we have the music going at the beginning of the chapter, and the creation of the world, great beauty being wakened into song, right? And by the end of it, we have a war between angels,
Yeah.
basically, uh,
Yeah.
and the chapter ends in war.
Well, I think another interesting thing is that the creation is ongoing. It doesn't ever stop because they're still trying to fulfill the vision. up until the end. So all of their fates are tied up in completing the creation, completing the vision that they were shown. And again, Melkor's part of that. So up until the very end, when he's, everything is remade, right?
Right.
So yeah, that's pretty cool.
I think that's super cool.
Tolkien sounds like a day ager to me.
You're not wrong.
Yeah. Fascinating fella. Thank you all very much. This has been an excellent discussion so far. I'm excited to talk about the next chapter.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll save my thoughts for why Aule is the best for next episode.
Sweet. We'll have our own battle over the Valar.
Or a Rome. I don't know. I can't decide.
Rome is pretty great.
It gets +1 or 500 for having a horse.
For the horse. Yeah, of course. Of course. I'm kind of shocked that he wasn't already the number one.
Well, I'm undecided.
All right. Until next time.
Watch Rings of Power.
Watch. I do not endorse. Well, I don't know. I'm watching it too, so I can't say I don't endorse that sentiment. But yeah, I will watch it. But I'll
just
complain
don't
about how
watch it thinking that's all that Tolkien is.
Don't think
Right.
you won't watch it thinking that it's anything close to it, really.
Yeah. The thing I've told people is like, watch the show and let your frustration with it as bad television whet your appetite for the lore behind it that they should have adapted. So every time somebody gets frustrated with the show, I'm like pointing them, no, this thing that's being told, that's actually told better, over here. And so I ought to just have like a backup pile of Silmarillions waiting to go and just like start handing them out. I'll put a little gospel tract in them too, just for good
So
measure.
when Mormons show up at your door, you hand them a copy of the Silmarillion.
Let me tell you about the one god Eru.
Do you have time to talk about Iluvatar?
Oh, there's multiple gods. We're totally okay with that.
Yeah, there's a bridge there. We can make a bridge.
Have you heard about the warrior king Galadriel? Queen, not king. Queen.
She's basically a king, Galadriel.
Same thing. It's 2022.
You're so heteronormative, Zach.
We're woke.
Get over it.
Let's be honest,
read a
though,
children's book about it.
Thank you.
How many times has a movie or a TV show been better than the book, though? Unless the book is absolute trash and the movie is better because the book was trash.
I can't think of any times.
Exactly. So you got to lower your standards a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
low standards, guys. Low standards.
I can't think of a book. I can't think of a movie that was better than the movie that I put on in my head when I read the book. If that makes sense. Like my imagery of who the people looked like what the world looked like, all that kind of stuff. I still haven't found a movie that I saw after I read the book that was better than what I had in my own mind.
Well, once Elon Musk buys Twitter, we'll be able to, communicate more effectively. So
yeah,
brain to brain Neuralink. We're gonna Neuralink, and you can show us the movie in your head.
I'm really excited for that. I'm praying for this. I may fast for this.
Okay. Cool.
On that note, thank you all very much for this wonderful discussion, and we'll be back again soon and continue our lovely little tromp through the highways and byways of the Silmarillion. And until next time, Namadie, and may Yahweh richly bless you. All right, you can laugh now.
Ah,
We are,
it was
we are
beautiful.
literally Baptist. Literally.
We're the illiterate Baptists.